And I thank the chairman. Since Fannie and Freddie were placed into conservatorship back in September of 2008, the Treasury has purchased $111 billion in preferred stock in the companies through the PSPA. That's a preferred stock purchase agreement. Just last week, Fannie's new quarterly reports came out, and they announced they need another $15.3 billion. To put this in perspective, Senator Bunning's effort to make the Senate pay for the $10 billion that it wanted to spend to attract that basically attracted nationwide attention. It slowed down the Senate for days. And that's $5.3 billion less than Fannie's most recent request, which is right now sailing through without a peep from anyone on the other side of the aisle. It's also, come to think of it, $300 million more than the $15 billion stimulus bill that has flummoxed the House leadership this week. Initially, Congress placed a cap on the amount the Treasury could lend to the GSEs, but on Christmas Eve last year, Treasury lifted that cap altogether, so that federal assistance is now virtually unlimited for the next 3 years. Now, because of this federal commitment, the CBO has concluded that the GSEs should be included in the federal budget. According to their own projections, the 10-year cost will be $398 billion. OMB, however, disagrees. In the President's budget request, the only cost associated with the GSEs is the repeated cash infusion. The difference in OMB and CBO's cost estimates are over $200 billion. Furthermore, even though it is now explicitly backed by the federal government, the GSE's debt, which was used to purchase mortgages, really the same way that Treasury auctions off T-bonds to finance the government, is not counted towards the statutory debt ceiling. To me, and CBO, I think, this is simply indefensible. Now that they have been placed in conservatorship, the distinction between Fannie and Freddie being sponsored by the government rather than operated by the government has now been eliminated. Now, according to the Treasury's logic, there should be some rational expectation that the GSEs will be able to pay back their money in the form of dividends for all the cash they put into it. Well, not the case. One of Fannie's most recent reports states, quote, "We expect that for the foreseeable future, the earnings of the company, if any, will not be sufficient to pay the dividends on the senior preferred stock. As a result, future dividend payments will be effectively funded from equity drawn from the Treasury." This is basically an intergovernmental transfer. We're paying the money over to them. They're sending it right back to us as dividends. Furthermore, under OMB's current budgetary treatment, the GSE's public actions do not really score as having any net cost to the taxpayer. For example, the President's fiscal year 2000 budget says, "Continued support for Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and the Treasury's mortgage-backed program, along with $1 trillion, have helped to lower interest rates." Well, the Freddie Mac's CEO admits, "We're making decisions on loan modifications and other issues without being guided solely by profitability, and no purely private bank ever could." So while keeping these interest rates artificially low or taking artificially write-downs may be good policy objectives of the administration, there is additional risk, and that additional risk is assumed by the taxpayer, and it's assumed in the form of additional support of the GSEs, and that is not reflected now anywhere in the President's budget. So when you think about all this, it becomes painfully obvious to anyone who cares to really look at it that the GSEs are now really just what? Wards of the state, meeting the administration's housing policy goals, but without any accountability whatsoever to the taxpayer. So what we want to suggest today, this must be corrected. So very simply put, my amendment would simply state that the committee recommends that Fannie and Freddie be put on budget and that their debt be subject to the debt limit. I'd also like to stress how disappointed I am with the Secretary Geithner when he announced recently that the administration will not be proposing any broader specific policy reforms to the GSEs until next year. Now, if you look at the chart that was up there before, and maybe it's up there again, the banks that the administration continues to vilify to score political points have paid almost all their bailout money back. Those are the red ones, and it's hard to see on the left and going over across. However, the tab for Fannie and Freddie is almost $400 billion and climbing with no end in sight. So when we want to lambast the banks and want to tax the banks and what have you, you look to the left, to the small red lines, and see they've paid most of their backs. That's the money going out from the American taxpayer to them. You look to the charts on the right, all the way up to the top, that's the money without any limit whatsoever going out to Fannie and Freddie. So if this administration is really serious about fixing the problem in our financial system, that are costing the taxpayer billions of dollars, then I think they really need to focus on the two most costly entities out there. Who are they? That's Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. And at the same time, we should be putting them on the budget, applying them to the debt ceiling so the American public is aware of what they're in for. And with that,